101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I've read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Without Restraint, no other than Mr. Robert DeLena.
Hey Daniel,
Welcome
thank you
to
so much.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Robert, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, my name is Robert DeLena. I'm from Revere, Massachusetts, which is close to Boston. I currently reside in Sudbury, Massachusetts, which is out in the burbs, west of Boston. I live with my wife, Mary Beth, and my son, Ryan, and my daughter, Abigail.
Mr. Robert DeLena, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world.
Appreciate it.
The title of your book is so powerful. What does Without Restraint symbolize in the context of your son's journey?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the title, and the book is about my son's journey. And my son was one of these challenging little kids who was fun to parent, but was one of these kids who never listened. And when he got to school, schools had a issue with the fact that he wouldn't listen. And through a series of medical experts and educational experts, we ended up in a therapeutic school where we were advised to learn how to restrain Ryan physically, and where they restrained Ryan multiple times throughout the day, which led to a long odyssey where he was, really abused by the system, and in a lot of ways was abused by us at home in those first couple of years when we were restraining him, until we realized the folly of it and how it wasn't an effective teaching method or parenting method at all. And what changed really was Ryan and I started skiing when he was about 7 years old, and I got to see Ryan away from all that, out in the outdoors, and in a place where he was free and allowed to be himself. And so the book title is just that. I mean, when he was finally in an area, in a part of his life where he wasn't restrained, he became a different kid, and a thriving kid. And it's the book is about that experience, and we hope that people will learn from the mistakes we made, and as parents, and hope that children who are suffering the same fate as Ryan can read this book, and take some hope in it.
Mr. Robert, was writing this book a form of healing for you and your family?
That's a great question, and 100%. And it was a bit painful, at times. And when I would write, my Ryan and I wrote separately, so I didn't see what he was writing, and he didn't really see what I was writing until the end, when we folded both versions together in the final version. But for me, as I was writing, it brought up so many feelings, and just guilt, and sometimes I would be at the keyboard and I would start to weep while I was typing, and that's how I knew it was impactful. And as I've done, a lot of these podcasts and talked about the book, and focused on it, I had a chance to revisit, what was going through my head at that time. Why was I so willing to listen to these experts and doctors and teachers, and why was I so willing to put Ryan in a position where he was suffering, because I wanted to fix him? And what was it about me that was, why couldn't I, accept the fact that he was different? And, that brings up a lot of guilt. And I think I've changed, and I like to think I'm a better person as a result of it. And, luckily for me, Ryan is not the kind of kid who doesn't hold any resentment. And he appreciates that we were doing our best, and we were first time parents, and we didn't know what we were doing either. And we made some mistakes, and those mistakes, were really bad mistakes. But I think he gives us credit for seeing, that we were wrong, and that there was a better way. And a lot of that came out in the time we spent together on the ski hill, and in the travel we did together, when he and I were alone, and we could really just focus on, what he was really like as a person. And I could see all the many strengths he has, and he was just such a wonderful kid. And I was so blind to it before that. And so I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I was able to get a second chance, and that he's become such a great person as a result.
Mr. Robert, beautifully articulated. Very well said.
Thank you.
How will you describe the message you hope readers take away from your story?
I think that the most important aspect, as a parent, you know your kid better than anybody else. And we talk about this in the book, my wife and I, a lot, that it's intimidating when you walk into a doctor's office. And my wife and I were trained lawyers, and but we didn't have medical degrees, and we're in Massachusetts, where some of the finest hospitals and schools are in the world. And when somebody has 3 degrees from Harvard on the back of their wall, it's easy to be intimidated and assume that they know more than you do. But as we learned quickly, doctors can only do so much, and they weigh in, they offer their opinion, but they're not living with the decisions and the everyday moments that you have as a parent, where you really get to know your child inside and out. So lesson one is really to trust your instincts, and that you know yourself better. And especially when you're being advised to do something by a school, or from a doctor, and then in your gut that it's not working, trust that voice, because you know more than they do. And I think we ignored that voice for a long time, because we didn't want to make waves, and we wanted to look like we were good patients, and we were going along with the schools, and we wanted to be good parents. But when I reached a point where I knew what they were doing was wrong, and I had evidence, because I was spending time with him, in these special places, in these ski places. I finally was able to fight, and nobody can fight for something harder than a parent who's feels like their child is being hurt by the system. And so I like to think that parents can take that lesson, that it's okay to to not know what you're doing in the beginning, but in the end, you've got to really trust your gut.
Mr. Robert, let's talk about skiing as a lifeline. How did your skiing become such a critical part of your son's healing and transformation?
Totally by accident, Daniel. I mean, it was fate or luck, or it depends what you believe, I guess. But uh, you know, I was just desperate for something to do with him. He was, especially when he was home for long stretches during vacations. He had a younger sister, or has a younger sister, Abigail, who's 16 months younger, and they would inevitably fight. And Ryan was always the bad kid in those exchanges, because he was the one who had quote unquote special needs, and was in a special school, and had this behavior plan. And so whenever there was conflict, my gut was to just get him out of there, and remove him from the situation before things got worse. I used to take him to all kinds of places just to kill time and wander around. And then one day, for some reason, and I still to this day don't know why, we drove to this little ski hill that's about 40 minutes from our house. And I hadn't skied in 25 years. I wasn't a skier, and he had never tried it. And I didn't even tell him where we were going. I just threw him in the car, and we ended up going there and having a pretty good day. And it wasn't perfect, but it was better than anything we had ever done prior to that. And I remember leaving there and thinking, that wasn't so bad. And we went back the next day, and then the next week we went to a bigger hill in Massachusetts, and the next week after that we were in New Hampshire, and then we were in Vermont. And it started this journey where we traveled the country together, and eventually the world. We ended up internationally in Chile. We skied a bunch of years down in Chile, and we ended up in Antarctica, which not many people can say they've been to Antarctica. We've been twice in a backcountry skiing expeditions, and most beautiful place on earth. Just life changing kind of experience. But it all started with that one day where I just threw up my hands, and I had no other answers, and it led me to this little, I don't know, I think it's a 400-foot ski hill in Massachusetts. And thank God we ended up there.
Thank God, indeed. What role did discipline, rest, and freedom, key elements in skiing, play in his personal development?
That's a great question. The one aspect I'd say that was, it was allowed to come out, I mean, and show that was previously suppressed, was risk taking. In most aspects of life, when you're a little kid, if you're climbing on the furniture, or you're wandering in the backyard, or you're leaving the front door open, it was always, Ryan, don't do this, Ryan, don't do that. And for the first time when we went skiing, you have to be disciplined, you have to follow the rules. But it's the one area of life, I'd say, where you can push the rules a little bit, and the kids that push the boundaries are rewarded. And if you go to any ski hill, the kids who go into the woods or jump off of things, and even if they're not supposed to, most people will clap and applaud and say, "Oh, good job," And prior to that, Ryan was always told not to do things, and that then if he was doing these things that the other kids were doing, he must be crazy. There must be something wrong with him. But he just was one of those kids that was a risk taker, and he measured risk. He was calculated about it. He was scientific. Things he got in trouble for, at home, risks he took. After in the aftermath, when you questioned him on it, he would have an explanation. He would have, studied it and realized that it was something he could do. And skiing allowed for that. It allowed him to, really be himself. And I think it was the first time he felt free, felt any freedom at all. And freedom not just from the schools and from the doctors, but probably from me and from his mother. That he was better than I was. I couldn't keep up with him. There were times when he would just lose me on the mountain, and I was trying to find him because he was this little kid who was just so much faster, and he could ski things I couldn't ski. And for the first time, he was on his own. But after the fact, I would look at him and think, he made good decisions. He didn't try to, do anything that was too crazy, and he didn't try to lose me. He just wanted to explore a trail that I couldn't do. And we both grew in that experience, and I got to give him more rope, I think. And I got to really appreciate, that he was, a really bright kid, thoughtful kid. He did his homework. He did his research on every mountain we went to. He always knew the trails better than I did. And a lot of times he was parenting me because I was, pretty inept in the beginning as a skier.
Let's talk about the emotional and mental health journey. What were some of the darkest or most challenging moments during your son's struggles?
So the restraint definitely had an impact on him. He had a lot of PTSD from it. And I think, I tried not to be too critical of the industry or come off as somebody who's anti-medication. But, when I look back on his journey, the ease in which medication was prescribed to him, and we try one, you try two, now he's on three, or we'll up this dose, reduce this dose. And there was this ping pong approach where, anytime he had a bad day, his medication would change. And he didn't go through puberty at the appropriate time because the medicines he was on had really stunted his development physically. And so it wasn't until his probably his third psychiatrist, a doctor who really took a kind of a jaundiced look at what we had done, and made us defend those decisions. And especially on the medicine, he was the first doctor who said to us, does Ryan need these medicines to live? And I didn't really understand what he meant. And when I questioned him on it, he said, because these medicines eventually are going to kill him. The side effects from them are so bad: weight gain, cholesterol, high blood pressure. Unless he needs them, in that moment, the long-term impacts of these, probably outweigh any benefits he's seeing. And when we finally did that analysis for ourselves, and looked and said, does he really need these? And we started to peel them back one by one. And I had already seen this kid, on the mountain that everybody else hadn't seen. So I was pretty convinced that he would be fine without them. And as soon as he came off all the meds, his body changed. He grew up, and he was a lot healthier. His endocrinology, his profile totally changed within months of being off the meds. So I'd say the darkest moments, were probably around that. Ryan also spent 2 weeks in a mental hospital when we were in the process of switching his medications. One of his psychiatrists, prior to the one I just talked about, suggested we do that in a hospital environment, because in case there were side effects, it would be safe. And you don't know what that's going to be like until you walk in the door and you sign away your child's freedom, and all of a sudden he's in this facility that he can't get out of until they say it's okay for him to leave. And that was, I knew, the second we walked through the door, that was a mistake. And all of a sudden we were there for 2 weeks, and it was a pretty dark time. I mean, it's a bleak place anyway, but particularly when it's your own child, and he's looking at me saying, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. And I had surrendered his freedom to these experts, and I never should have done that. So if that's probably the worst, 2 weeks, and the worst mistake we made was that experience. But it coincides with a lot of these other bad decisions, particularly around medication, I think.
Were there moments when you questioned whether he or you would make it through?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I used to say when Ryan really got into skiing, and people would look at some of the things he was skiing, and some of the things he was doing, and said, I could feel that undercurrent of, this kid's gonna hurt himself out there. And I remember thinking, I always, I knew he would never hurt someone else, but the way he was so bound up, and was so down on himself, and he had very few friends, and he really didn't have anything positive in his life aside from skiing. I remember thinking, I'd rather he die out there on a mountain doing something he loves than I find him hanging in the garage, which I really thought I would one day walk home to. And I think, if it wasn't for skiing, I think, his, I don't know where he'd be. I mean, Ryan is a pretty resilient kid, and I think he would have eventually found something else, or I don't know if he ever would have ultimately given up on himself to that degree. But that was the greatest fear I had as a parent, was that he would take his own life, because it just, his life seemed so limited and sad to me. I honestly, I almost had to come to terms with it, so that if it did happen, I would have understood, I think, that why he did it. And then, when I saw him skiing, and he was just this different kid, and 2 3 years after we really got into skiing, I knew that was never going to happen. He was, the world was going to be his backyard. He was going to explore every inch of it. And sure, there's risk involved in skiing, and people die in avalanches all the time, and it's tragic. But he'd be living his life if something like that were to happen.
Mr. Robert, what would you say to other parents who feel helpless in supporting a struggling child?
Yeah, there are many days like that, I've had I think the privilege of hearing from a lot of parents who've read the book or heard about the book, and I'll get emails out of the blue asking for help, and it's a daunting, thought, because I can't always tell people how to parent their kid. I usually can tell them what not to do, but I think if nothing else, I can offer a glimmer of hope. And the hope I offer is that we were in as dark a place as any. I mean, I saw no way out, and we stumbled into skiing, and it changed everything. So for any kid who's is in this dark, awful place, and has no self-confidence, or school has been a disaster, there's always something. There's life is just filled with just beauty and joy and wonder, and intrigue, and you never know what's around the corner. And if you just keep trying things, and we tried a lot of things with Ryan. I tried every sport under the sun, and a lot of them ended in tears. It wasn't just that the skiing was the first thing we tried, and lucky we were. So for parents, there's going to be this series of fits and starts, and you never know what it's going to be. It could be art, music, furniture making, who knows. But there's something that will give that child a little bit of confidence, and a reason to get up in the morning, and suddenly it'll be balanced against all of the bad that they've had to weigh for the rest of their life. And life will look a lot different when they have something that they love. And so that's the hope I offer parents. And I think that's the pathway for anybody, even if your kid's typically developing. It's, look around. I mean, these kids are sad. I mean, the phone is, social media. I mean, their life is being sucked out of them sometimes. And if there's something else that can just give them a little bit of confidence, I think it makes a world of difference.
Mr. Robert, thank you so much for your advice. And what will be your short term and long term goals in writing?
So writing, that's interesting. I enjoyed writing the book a lot. I mean, I really did. It's such a personal story that it's hard to follow up, because I don't know if I could write a fiction book, or I mean, but the act of writing, I think I really do enjoy. Ryan and I have talked about collaborating on other projects, and he's now become really a top notch rock climber. He's done a lot of skiing around the world, and I think we could probably figure some sort of, a short-term goal where we wrote some sort of guidebook for, local skiing, or for some of the places we've been. Long-term, I'd like to write another, memoir type book. I think, I've got plenty of interesting family beside for my son, and I think my life is, I've touched on some interesting people. I feel like there's something there. I just haven't figured it out quite yet, but I'd like to do more writing. It's a great experience. It's a great journey. It's hard, and it's if you're doing it for the money, I got bad news for you. It's got to be something that you're passionate about and something that you love, because otherwise, it's not going to feel like it was worth it. But when people come up to you and say they read your book, or you get emails out of the blue and say how impacted they were by the book, I mean, there's no better feeling than that.
Priceless. Totally priceless. Mr. Robert, thank you so much for sharing your book to the world, and good luck to your goals. How did your son feel about your writing and publishing this story? Was he involved in the process?
So he had mixed feelings because it's so personal to him, and by the time we started writing, he had gotten back into public school, and that not everybody at the public school was aware of his journey, especially spending 2 weeks in a mental hospital and the medication. But I kept coming back to him and saying, I really think people would benefit from this, and I said we could change the names, we don't have to even use your real name. I just think people would like this. And finally, he came back to me and he said, "If we're going to do it, I want to just reveal everything. I want to tell people everything that happened to me." And that was really brave on his part. So we wrote, like I said, we wrote separately, and then when he gave me what he had written, I really liked it. It was so self-reflective, and his recall, he has a photographic memory, so the stuff he remembered from when he was a little kid was amazing. Now you'll go laugh, Daniel, but he hated what I wrote. So the 100 or so pages I had spent so much time and effort on, I plowed my everything into it. He was horrified by it because I was so angry, and I used those 100 pages to get my revenge on every teacher and every doctor that we'd ever encountered. And it was just my way of sort of having this revenge tour. And he came back to me and said, "Dad, I'm fine. I'm okay. Like that's not the story I want to tell, that I was wronged by this system and now look how awful my life is, because my life is pretty great." And I thought about it, and I think, he's right. This story ends with a happy ending. So I rethought it, and that's when I really was able to look at my own behavior, and I made it more about me. Where were my mistakes? It wasn't these other people's fault. They were just doing their job. When we walked in, those doctors were giving us the best advice they could give, and those teachers were doing their best. These are hard kids to manage. It was me. It was my fault. And so I went back and rewrote the whole thing. I gave him another version, which he liked a lot better. And then we folded in both versions, and then we started showing it to friends and family, and everybody tells you it's great, but it wasn't great. It was still very raw. We did find an editorial consultant who edited it for us, and she taught me how to write dialogue, and to turn a lot of those scenes where I described them into conversations, and it really brought the story to life. And I went back to Ryan on some stuff and said, can you add a little more here and give me, another, I forgot this one thing I want you to write, and he was willing to do more. And after that version, I think it got to a point where it was pretty good, and we pitched agents, and we got an agent right away, which was, we were stunned when we did. It was a pretty great day when we heard we had an agent, and then she pitched publishers, and we got an offer pretty quickly. I mean, it wasn't a huge offer, but all of a sudden we were in that in that world where we were going to be published, and that was a pretty special day. I'll never forget.
Mr. Robert, were there parts of the book that were especially difficult or cathartic to write?
Both. I mean, I think the difficult part is when you have to analyze your own decision making and your own behavior, and realize, not just that you made a mistake, but that you were motivated by all the wrong reasons. I wanted to take this kid and I wanted to make him perfect because I was embarrassed by his behavior, or that he wasn't. And if I could just give him this magic pill, or we could just do this behavioral, method where we were holding him against the ground, he was going to be this different person. And that's hard. It's hard to look at yourself and say, well, what is it about me that allowed that? And that was tough. But the other parts for me, don't forget, I mean, there are two of us writing, and having to read his recollections about being restrained physically, or having to go to some of these places like the hospital, It's pretty tough when I think you hope when you're a parent. When he was so little that he just forgot it all, but he didn't forget any of it. He remembered it in unbelievable detail, and he described what it felt like in those moments. And it was really hard to read, but I think it was something I had to face. I mean, I couldn't be in denial anymore about the mistakes I had made, and that was, I think, what motivated me to finish, was to get this book out there to say to parents, none of us really know what we're doing. We're all just doing our best, and we're gonna make mistakes, and hopefully they're ones you can either course correct, or make changes in yourself, and just become a better parent. And I think it's that's my story within the book is the story within the story, and it's my growth as a parent and as a person, and I think that's in those pages as well.
Indeed, to be a good parent, and we salute you for that, Mr. Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to one of my audiobooks, people, because Book 101 Review Volume 3 is on Audible. Book 101 Review Volume 2 selected, and Book 101 Review Volume 1 highly recommended. These are the products of my first season on Book 101 Review, and one of my self help books, Trends of Existence, Weaving the Tapestry of Life, Stand Tall, Stand Together, Breaking the Chains of Bullying, and Life is Too Short, a journey of discovery, of fulfillment, and joy. And one of my climate change book, Earth Fever, The Unraveling Climate and Our Race to Restore Balance, available on Audible, and one of the best sellers. So, Mr. Richard, or Mr. Robert, sorry, how do you hope this story continues to make an impact in the world of parenting, mental health, or even skiing?
Well, I mean, I think watching, and if you're a follower of Ryan on YouTube, he's Ryan DeLena, DELENA, or on Instagram, extreme_Ryan_DeLena. Watch Ryan live his life, and if you want to see someone living life to the fullest, traveling, having experiences as a rock climber, as a skier, as a person, somebody who had a difficult childhood, who could be sitting on a couch in a therapist's office right now, blaming his parents for everything that went wrong in his life, and why why life hasn't turned out the way he wanted it to. It's the opposite. Ryan has embraced, that he's given this second chance, and that he was able to, through the travel that we did together, see the world and get a taste for other cultures, other people, other places, and it's something that drives him to want to do more of. And he's been to some great places. So he's someone that you'll be inspired by. And if you have issues with mental health, he talks a lot about that in his blogs and his videos, and some of the stuff he had to face, and he's still working through. But he does it, hanging off of a side of a mountain or skiing down a mountain in a healthy, productive way. He eats right. He lives right. He's changed the way I eat and live. I mean, I'm a lot healthier because of him, and I think it's somebody that you'll enjoy following, and that you'll get a lot out of, and you'll make changes in your own life because of the way he lives his.
Mr. Robert DeLena, thank you so much for sharing without restraint to the world. And can you please invite our listeners to support without restraint?
Thank you so much. You can find the book everywhere: Amazon, Audible. The audiobook's pretty good.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Robert DeLena, because if you support him, for sure there will be more and more empowering books like this to come. Mr. Robert, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Modicon people, see you soon.